Today, what I want to do with my presentation is give some evidence into this debate from the Netherlands, really focusing on the way that the public and publics value humanities research. And I want to argue that we should be focusing much more and in much more detail on who precisely those publics are, rather than simply let a group of elites and their discussions speak on the behalf of these publics. So I'm going to talk today about the case of the Netherlands, and the starting point for the evidence has to be the fact that there's an incredibly active debate about humanities and its role in public life. It's taken place within Parliament, it's taken place within policymakers, academic circles, research funders, advisory bodies, newspapers, commercial publishers. And from the 1980s onwards, the purported decline or vitality of the humanities research base in the Netherlands and its wider social value and place in Dutch society have continuously been discussed, dissected, debated and portrayed in print. But this is a science cafe that took place on Monday night. I wish I'd been able to go to it, but unfortunately I was busy. And this is a group of Dutch, an event for a Dutch public. I'm not sure if you're aware of how a science cafe works, but it's where a group of people come together to hear a debate of interest and to participate in this debate. And this is really a debate about the public value of science. A philosopher from my own university, who I spoke to in the course of my research, Leonie, who has also been involved in the project, and a consultant from Ecoris, talking about the public value of debate, the public value of research. And the point is that the previous slide isn't showing a standalone fossilized library. There is a community of people in the Netherlands debating and discussing this whole issue of public humanities. It's not a closed debate, it's part of a wider set of debates around knowledge at the service of Dutch society more generally. Whether Dutch society is very narrowly defined in economic and functional terms, or much more broadly to cover issues of politics, culture and identity. And what we see in the Netherlands, and which I hope will emerge continuously in the course of my story, is that the public are interested and active in these debates. And so understanding public value and public values needs to better capture this process of how publics participate and shape what are often regarded as elite debates. To give some background to this, I'm talking about publicly funded arts and humanities research. And it takes place effectively in two kinds of institutions: universities and research institutes. Now, although humanities occupies a very specific place in the elite Dutch universities, even these universities are not ivory towers. The University of Amsterdam, one of the four elite universities, has always had close links to the city council and to city communities. And then there's 10 other universities that do humanities research who have explicitly social missions. Humanities research takes place there, and there is an expectation that that research will be useful. So one important point is that the humanities in Dutch universities is never taking place from an ivory tower perspective. The other significant research institutes that are funded through public resources are a number of research institutes. Now, these were originally very few in number, but have expanded greatly in recent years. And the slide shows the main humanities ones. There's good coverage of humanities fields, specialist research centres. And they have a mission to be useful, or at least publicly valuable. So one of these institutes, the NIOT, the Institute for War, Holocaust and Genocide Studies, that emerged out of attempts to make sense, ultimately really to come to terms with the occupation of the Netherlands that took place in World War II, the resistance, the collaboration, the divisions in society. But this has not become a fossilized centre, as we shall see later. It's evolved over time. Now, all publicly funded research institutes in the Netherlands, and Ted alluded to this previously, have to be evaluated every 6 years. And the evaluation process, just looking at the process, provides an interesting litmus test of where the debaters got to. Half of that evaluation covers the public value, the social value of that research. The humanities community spent 3 years discussing and debating and piloting a set of indicators for measuring the social utility of that research. And this this has now been agreed in a report this summer that this is the way that humanities will evaluate their public utility. And I would argue that, if you can read that, this looks like what it is. It's an outcome of a closed, elite discussion with a group of producers where the public haven't really been present. The public value as it's portrayed here is a public value as it's seen in terms of a set of producer outputs. So you get a set of agreeable things that are agreeable to those producers, to the professors, a series of what are effectively input measures. But this seems a very technocratic and deracinated approach. When you go to the Netherlands as an outsider and start scratching around under the surface, as I did, you very quickly find examples of these incredible impacts. So NIOT, that I talked about previously, moved on from World War II to cover all wars and reconciliation processes. And on the basis of this expertise, in 1996, it was commissioned by the Dutch government to look at the role of a battalion of Dutch peacekeepers in a massacre in Srebrenica in Bosnia. And over a course of 6 years, a research report was produced. It criticised the government, it criticised the Prime Minister, who promptly resigned. And the elections brought a seismic shift in the nature of Dutch politics. You see in the two pie charts the shift from the purple coalition of the left, from left liberal to a radical right, almost overnight. At the same time as the Netherlands, from an outsider's perspective, went into a period as a society with a much weaker sense of societal self-confidence. And of course, humanities research doesn't just impact on Dutch publics at these moments of tectonic change. It also happens on a daily basis. There's a huge appetite amongst Dutch publics, television audiences, for example, to hear about humanities research. So this is on the right, that's on the left, sorry. That's the viewing figures for all Dutch television on Sunday nights. And we see at number 18 the programme Andere Tijden, watched by over 500,000 people in a relatively small country. The show was about how a new margarine product launched in the 1960s caused a mysterious disease, and how this mysterious disease was dealt with, the so-called planter affair. And when you look at how this programme was actually constructed, you start to see that the programme is a representation of an interesting scientific web that brings in a professor at the Erasmus University and who's written a book about when technological developments go wrong from a historical perspective. And that book has been taken up by Arnold Bosman, who is the Director of Training at the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control. And he uses the planter affair, as constructed and portrayed by Professor Jan van den Ende, to argue for better, improved ways of dealing with public health in Europe. And given that the way that the public health in Europe has improved in recent decades and years, this is part clearly of as a general sense of improvement in society. But still, these two models seem to be of a lot of research in which humanities progresses or flows into the public in quite a linear way. One of the reasons that we talk about this is because sometimes this can be quite huge in number, the 500,000 viewers who turned in to watch Andere Tijden last Sunday. This is an example of how excellent research can be useful that I like to give, or useful to publics. This is a piece of linguistics research that was done by the Max Planck Institute in Nijmegen, funded by the German, not the Dutch taxpayer, but taxpayer funded nonetheless. And it's the guy who wrote, it's a PhD looking at the use of idiophones in an African language. Now, an idiophone is, an onomatopoeia is a specific form of idiophone. An onomatopoeic word is a word that sounds like what it's supposed to represent. So children often use the word bow wow for a dog. That's an early form of onomatopoeia. But it's an oral idiophone. And there are many other kinds of idiophones that exist. And the language that he studied, he attempted to do a synthetic analysis, a systemic analysis of idiophones in this particular language. Graduated cum laude, top 2% of Dutch PhD theses that year. Clearly excellent world-class research. But there's also a huge public interest in this. So you see, he appears on Radio 2, on the Dolph Janssen show, listened to about typically by 100,000 people for 7 minutes. He appeared in the Saturday supplement of the leading, I suppose you would call it highbrow newspaper, NRC, typically read by about 100,000 people. You might spend 10 minutes reading that article. He appeared for 12 minutes on a science show on television that was watched by 340,000 people. So out of this one piece of excellent research, you can start making claims that hundreds of thousands of people are at least interested in it. They value it enough in some way to spend their time, to devote their time, their valuable time, to understanding it. But the public in the Netherlands are not just recipients of this knowledge in this linear transfer process. They're active in constructing the arenas in which that research is presented, in which voices are heard, and in which agendas are set. So you have a magazine like Historisch Nieuwsblad, and that has a readership of about 25,000 people, typically what you call in England ABC1s, the highly educated, disposable income elite. But there's still a lay community, and they're a lay community that interact in many different ways with the academic community, if not directly in the knowledge production process and the nitty-gritty of the science in that, in the arenas and the venues within which it circulates, presents, disseminates. And so in this magazine, when you start to read it, and when you talk to people who are involved with it, the academics and their research run very deeply through the magazine in many different ways, but without an academic agenda controlling what's portrayed. Academics have to be pliable to the interests of the public, what the public value, in order for their voices to be heard. And the public are interested in PhDs. The public are interested in national commissions of inquiry into a national canon of history in the Netherlands, because 25,000 of them read about it every month, and some of that readership participate in events, either publicised or organised by the magazine. And so that's an example of a landscape of humanities research in which concepts are circulating, and the ways in which publics experience, encounter, interact with, and ultimately have the chance to shape those concepts. And so, given this landscape, and I've tried to point to some of the areas, the arenas and venues and connections by which those knowledges circulate and interact with publics. So clearly a linear model of understanding this process is inadequate. You can't say that the Srebrenica report caused a national crisis of confidence. You can't say it caused the death of multiculturalism in the Netherlands. But clearly, it was the revelation of the knowledge that it contained within shaped the evolving zeitgeist in the Netherlands in ways that continue to have profound consequences to this day. So a linear model really only is able to capture part of the process. Dave gave a much better taxonomy than I can of the different ways in which you can attach economic value. So I talk very briefly here about shadow prices. If you use a value of €5.50 an hour for people's leisure time, then you can say the value of that research in the Andere Tijden program was €300,000. But that just ultimately captures a tiny element of that landscape, one part of the transaction, the kind of the right at the end of the pipe. And the public's interest and the public's value of that research exists throughout that landscape. And for me, the challenge is to come up with a way to identify all the transactions in that landscape, all the connections. Jordi alluded to this, that there needs to be a much better understanding of the circulation of concepts as a whole. But I think what we don't want to do here is throw the baby away with the bathwater, to use an English metaphor. There's a reason why we use prices. There's a reason why we use economic value, and it's because it's unambiguous. It's easily counted. More, there's a clear better, worse, more, less. More economic impact is clearly better than less economic impact. Now, you know, even within economics, people say, well, there's always a trade-off, more pollution, how do you value the economic activity of something that potentially leads to more people dying? You know, but those kinds of issues can be relatively easily technically dealt with. When you come to dealing with the public value of anything, not just research, there's far more ambiguity about what counts as positive results and what counts as a development. And so, in a sense, echoing Magnus's tennis, I come to a piece of knowledge circulation in Dutch society when it's really not clear what could count as a positive development. How would you value this piece of research for society? In 2009, the Dutch Justice Minister, who was worried about this political shift in the Dutch landscape, the end of multiculturalism, the rise of the radical right, She commissioned a legal research centre affiliated to the University of Tilburg to investigate whether a new right-wing political movement, the Party for Freedom, led by Geert Wilders, whether it was extremist and whether it was a threat to Dutch society. There's an interesting backstory to the University of Tilburg. In the 1980s, they were threatened with closure if they didn't increase the number of students, increase the number of graduations, and increase their relevance to society. So since then, that university has really had a strongly social mission. And the EVA, the research institute that delivered the report, that's part of the university's struggle for survival. But separate from that, the report came out, and it was politically very sensitive. It was leaked. Early versions went in the newspapers, and it gave quite a nuanced reading of the situation. It's a party of the radical right, but it's not a traditional party of the extreme right. It's not a fascist party. But potentially, it's a danger to state security. Now, that was published in January 2010. Shortly afterwards, Geert Wilders, the leader of the party, said the EVA, University of Tilburg, they're the toilet duck of the Minister for Justice. They're doing her dirty work, letting her get away scot-free with it. So there's clearly set of competing claims. The legal research useful society or legal research not useful society. 3 months later, over the unrelated issue of troops in Afghanistan, the Dutch government fell, and at the poll that followed 3 months later, Geert Wilders, his party, increased from 6% to 16% of the national vote. He went from really being a marginal party to a party that moved into government supporting the coalition. So how can you deal with publics that might have a negative value? Imagine how those 16% of the Dutch population feel about this research that challenges their views, that says that in some way they are negative, they are part of an extremist, a radical right movement that's a potential danger to state security. It's negative value not just in an opportunity cost, not how many hospitals could you have bought instead of the EVA report. What you have to do is, there's a real disbenefit to these people. They feel threatened by it. They feel threatened by research, so it is negative to them. And so any kind of discussion of the public value of humanities research has to have a serious way of dealing with that tension. So, I've come to the end of my time, I've come to the end of my story, and so really to sum up about what I think the evidence from the Netherlands tells us about the public value of humanities research and the kinds of insights we might have into measuring it, I really just want to make 4 simple points. And I'm not making points that I don't think anyone before me today has already made. But the first of these is that humanities research is active. It is the ivory tower. Certainly, if it ever existed, doesn't exist today. But the value is achieved through a series of societal conversations in which publics are involved. Those societal conversations transform the nature of the knowledge base, so that knowledge is circulated, it flows, it evolves, it deforms, and you hope useless, outdated knowledge will die out. And ultimately, it's the process of the circulation and use of that knowledge that represents that public value. Public value is produced by people unself-consciously using those concepts and belief systems. And so in order really to come up with a measurement system that can properly capture the public value of that research, there needs to be a much better understanding of these research landscapes, these research ecologies, the valencies by which different bits of research and publics connect. By understanding the social life of humanities, the social life of those concepts and how publics are involved in that, that is necessary to understand which relationships you want to count. And when you start to identify what you want to count, then you've taken an important first step towards actually measuring it. Thank you very much.